Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mikowski, and joining me today are two special guests. First, my colleague from Emerging Civil War, JoAnna McDonald, is joining us today from Wilmington, North Carolina. Excuse me, JoAnna. Hello.
Hello. It's actually Raleigh now, but
Oh,
close.
see, look at that. You moved, and I so quick. I can't even see how it goes. And then joining me from the battlefields outside of Richmond, Virginia, is my friend Michael Gorman. Hello.
Hey, good to see everybody.
Great to have you guys with us here. And so I've asked JoAnna and Mike to join us today because I came across something as I was reading up on Stonewall Jackson, which I'm sure is a surprise to a lot of you, and Robert E. Lee. And I thought, I'm going to talk to a couple of Lee experts on this. JoAnna actually has a dissertation that she completed through Morgan State. It's called Robert E. Lee's Grand Strategy and Strategic Leadership Caught in a Paradoxical Paradigm. Now, that certainly sounds like academies to me, since you're using the word paradigm, and there's a colon in there. So
yeah. And paradox.
Paradox, too. And Mike spends a lot of time on the battlefields of Richmond talking about 1862 and 1864, and he has feelings. So I thought I would bring these two together to talk about Lee. So let me start with the quote that kind of got my interest, and then Mike, I'll ask you to comment on it here. And this comes actually as Lee's getting ready to send Jackson towards Cedar Mountain, and he writes a note and he says, "A.P. Hill, you will, I think, find a good officer with whom you can consult, and by advising your divisions and commanders as to your movements, much trouble will be saved you in arranging details, as they can act more intelligently." And as I thought about this, is like, does Lee follow his own advice, particularly since this is coming on the heels of the 7 days? So, Mike, let me just ask you, as a guy who spent a lot of time with Lee in the 7 days, does he follow his own advice?
But you just jumped right into it. We're going heavy here. Well, I mean that is a great question. As anybody who studies the 7 days knows, it's impossible to look at particularly Jackson in the 7 days and go, wow, that was really great. In fact, that's really impossible. Even the greatest Jackson scholars are just like, always wrestling, trying to make heads or tails of it. Now the question always comes up is what degree is this a Jackson failure or Lee having leadership issues? I mean, remember, he's new to command. He has just gotten the big chair when Joseph Johnston was wounded. One of the things that I'm always interested in is, he's a temporary commander, right? Nobody is like, oh, Johnson's out, you're in, you get the Army of Northern Virginia and it's yours, go, right? So, he's working with Johnson's army. And I've always wondered if Johnson sprang from his bed in mid-July and said, I'm back, what would have happened, right? What would they have been like, yeah, that's Lee's army now. Or would they have been like, great, you're back? I don't know. Of course, that doesn't happen. But there must have been a moment where Lee's hold on the Army of Northern Virginia was so strong that relieving him or bringing Johnson back was just impossible. I've never seen anything about that. Maybe y'all could chime in and let me know if you've ever seen anything about that. But really shows you that quote that you just raised, that as late as, well, actually as early as sending Jackson off was going to become Cedar Mountain right after the 7 days. He's having a hard time really reconciling the fact that he's got all these generals and suggesting. There's Lee suggesting again, right? I think you will find a good leadership quality there. Maybe you want to, just saying, maybe you want to talk to each other and coordinate and all that kind of stuff. Because when you look at the 7 days, I'm going right to your question here. That's where I'll get there. I will. I'll get there. It really is. It makes me wonder, the longer I look at this, did everybody really know what was supposed to happen? Because I'm asking that seriously, because time and again you see people confused about what their role is, and not just Jackson. Jackson's an easy target. I'm not talking just about Jackson. I'm talking virtually everybody. Lee seemed to have taken a real light touch, a real stand back, and classically when they meet at the Dabbs house. And Jackson's ridden in from the Shenandoah Valley. Oh my gosh, there's Stonewall Jackson. Everybody's amazed to see him. And Lee classically brings them all together in this room. Introduces everybody, and says, here's what I want to have happen. I want to strike at McClellan north of the Chickahominy, and I want you guys to plan it. And he walks off. He leaves the room. And we have accounts of this. We have Longstreet's account. If it's problematic, but if you choose to believe it. And there are a few others that sort of hint at this is what's going on. And Jackson apparently said, I can be there in position to attack on the 25th. And Longstreet was like, well, hold on, but Lee's not involved. Lee's not there. And so right back to your question is well, maybe I'll answer your question in the form of a question, which is to say, is his leadership style really more of a I put everybody in the room and hope good things happen, or is it I need to take a direct hand and tell A.B. Hill what to do and tell Longstreet what to do and Jackson what to do? That quote that you brought up really shows the opposite, doesn't it? It shows you that he's really thinking, hey, I'll put A.P. Hill and Jackson together. Maybe good things will happen. No, those personalities did not mesh. Did not mesh. Not at all. I mean, if you think about it, when Jackson got wounded, it kind of solved the problem for Lee, because those two were like two dogs going at it, and Jackson had been under arrest, for God's sake. And A.B. Hill wanted a court martial, and Lee is like, please don't, just go away.
Let it go.
Please let it go. And of course he can't order, and he doesn't order Jackson to stand down. So it's one of these things where we, and I guarantee you, we as people who look at the Civil War, when we come at it, we often imagine Lee with like an Xbox controller, right? And he's got all the power, and he can say what he wants to have happen, and it happens. I think that's a very superficial way to look at it. I think your question goes right to the core of this, as that he is very much the kind of guy who recognizes the limit of his power, but also gives himself probably less power than he could have wielded. And that goes a long way. When you understand that, I think when you look at the 7 days, it starts to make a little bit more sense. As his first time out, I look, these guys seem to know what they're doing. His staff officers are not good staff officers, and they don't write good orders. And that's odd to me, because Lee was a staff officer. And there are no good maps, and that's odd because Lee was an engineer and was all about maps. So you really kind of see him not exercising all of this control that he might have had, although in our mind we imagine that he is. And I love that. I love that tension. I love that dichotomy.
Yeah.
That was the very long answer to your awesome question.
And we're going to get back. You've given us a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of things I want to touch on. No, it's fantastic. I probably won't have to ask another question for this whole thing here. JoAnna, as we sort of think about that idea of Lee's leadership style and the power that he chooses to delegate and hold, kind of what's your overall impression of him as a leader?
So this quote from the Cedar Mountain campaign, we're talking, I might have friends who watch this and aren't Civil War historians. We're talking Cedar Mountains after 7 days, right?
Correct.
Okay. And A.P. Hill and Longstreet just got into their little tiff that was quite public, which we can discuss later. So that's kind of the context. This is after 7 days. Lee uses two techniques that he learned. We are our experiences. So Lee started leading when he was 10. His mom fell ill, and Lee became the head of the house at 10. That's not normal. I'm not saying Lee's abnormal. He is learning his technique to order his mom around, which is, it's not natural. So he's also getting what his mom did toward the kids, and his mom used what is called tactful authoritarian. It's an oxymoron a bit, because authoritarian you come across as more of a Sherman. You will do this. Or his dad was like that. Henry III, you will do this, with a big voice. That's not going to be Lee. Lee uses this tactful, authoritarian, softer. It's not a feminine necessarily, but it's softer. For civilians, Mike, you can get this. He uses his Jedi skills. You want to do this, don't you? I do. So
these are not the Yankees we're looking for.
That's right. You want to go over there and hit them. Okay. So you've got that side. That's a big part of who he is. And then the other part is his experience in the Mexican War and working under Winfield Scott, who is a bigger personality in that he is more of that stereotypical commander of that bigger presence. I don't mean the physical necessarily. So Winfield Scott's going to
although that too.
he was, and Winfield Scott seemed to peck a fight with everybody that he came across. Lee doesn't like that. Lee learned very early as a child that he doesn't, anything that comes up as debate, he gets uncomfortable. But he gets, and if you deal with any generals, you know that they are very opinionated. But Lee's Lee's got all that going. And after the Mexican War, Winfield Scott actually gets not arrested, but his subordinate officers, the major generals he worked under, they go after him. And it really affects Lee in that he goes the opposite way. And he's like, I don't want to offend my immediate senior officers. I don't tell them, I don't want to get involved where I'm saying you can't do that, you can't do this. So that's where his skill of the Jedi Knight skills of he hones that more. And that's really, he's using his Jedi skills when he tells Jackson, AP Hill's a good guy, but you also have the context of AP Hill went in too fast at which battle, Mike, in the 7 days? Is that Gaines or the first one, Beaver?
Beaver Dam Creek and Gainesville.
Yeah, both.
Oh, well, okay.
You get a 2 for 1 on that one.
Oh, yeah. So, but there again, and once I get to writing this book, not the dissertation, you've got to get your command presence over AP Hill. And Lee doesn't want to because AP Hill's using aggressive tactics. And as long as your senior officer, in Lee's mind, is using aggressive tactics, Lee's not going to touch him. But if you see, we have hindsight, and I think that's a beautiful thing to use as historians. Lee doesn't, but Lee should have the hindsight to say, if you don't talk to AP Hill in a perfectly professional way, don't hurt his ego. And Lee could have done this, but he doesn't want to because he's scared he's going to hurt his ego. AP Hill's. You just tell AP Hill, you've got to wait for everybody to coordinate because we've got to use the hammer. You going in by yourself to attack isn't going to help the effort. So
we've got all these difficult personalities to manage. And,
right.
And Mike, you talked about this meeting at the Dobbs house where let's put them all in the room, introduce everybody. And how much of that moment is Lee taking the measure of essentially his new subordinates? He knows who they are and he's been working with them for a few weeks, but this is the first time we're taking the car out for test drive.
Mike.
I've got the keys. I'm gonna use it. No, I think the big moment, and you can just imagine that when Jackson rides up, right? Because everybody has been with Johnston, everybody else has been with Johnston, and now Lee is in command, and they've, like you said, for a few weeks, they've all been in proximity. But here's this guy, right? And we all know what's going on. The Shenandoah Valley is more or less, the shining bright star that is these victories that Jackson is pulling off in the Shenandoah Valley. And remember, this is a time of darkness in the Confederacy, right? Nothing is going right anywhere. So, yes, we as military historians can look back and we can see that the battles that Jackson's fighting in the Shenandoah Valley are very, very small compared to what's going to come. But at that time, this is ringing out because, wow, the only good news the Confederates had was coming from him, right? So when Jackson rides up, this is in my mind, hi, nice to meet you, Jackson. I remember you back in 1861, like in a couple of times, and then you pulled that resigning stunt. That was really funny, by the way. I really liked the response. But it's not like let's have a drink and chill out and learn each other. He literally, okay, great, Jackson's here. All right, everybody into the room, and okay, here's what I want. Here's what I want to do, and I'm out. I mean, I find that interesting. You know, this is the guy. And remember, the plans that are going to be hatched involve Jackson constantly being the man of action, the flanking, you know, element, the one that's got the biggest role to play. And you know, there really doesn't seem to have been a whole lot of let's work. You know, you and I have only been corresponding. You know, it's like when you send a lot of emails to somebody and then you finally meet them in person. You're like, wow, that, you know, I think we know each other. You know, no, it's the opposite. So you know, I think that goes back to what JoAnna was talking about, is this, you know, managing these personalities. In a way, maybe that's sort of indicative of that. Is he doesn't look. I'm not here to manage personalities right now. I want this to happen. We're here to do this thing. You know, and I don't like getting into people's heads, but I guarantee you, Mike Gorman plays this a little differently when I meet Stonewall Jackson for the first time at the dad's house. I'm just saying, we're gonna have a little chat.
So
and make
tell,
sure
how does General Mike Gorman handle this? And I'll ask how General JoAnna McDonald plays.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, you know you invited that one.
Oh, I did, yes, but you know, first of all, I don't do what ifs, and you know, hindsight is valuable, and I know what's coming. So you know, yes, I'd be like, okay, we're just going to put Magruder over there, and we're not going to. He's not involved, and no, you know, it's going to be very much a. I want to take the measure of my crew. I want to. We can look back now and we can see this is the first meeting of the Army of Northern Virginia as we come to understand it under Lee, right? And the meeting is, as it turned out, very inauspicious. I guess it's because of the ticking clock, and believe me, Lee knows there's a ticking clock that Earl and McDowell can come south now, right now, in 2 hours. He could be here, right? So he's very much, we got to go. We got to go now, right? I understand. I do. But I would take at least an hour to sort of socialize and, you know, let's all talk and sort of figure out what we're good at. And, you know, everybody meet Jackson. Here he is. You know, hey, good job there, Porter Bullock, really cool. You know,
my pen pal from the Valley. You know, that's kind of who he is.
I try not to resign again. That generated a lot of paperwork. You know, if I give you an order you don't like, let's talk rather than send something to the Secretary of War. Yeah, that kind of thing. You know, less drama maybe. Yeah. But yeah, I sit everybody down and let's hash it out. And I'd probably take a much firmer hand and stay at least in the room to say, you know, okay, boy, Jackson seems to be getting the heavy lifting here. He seems really, you know, hard charging and hoorah, but you know, is this practical? I don't know.
Yeah. And his men aren't even on the battlefield at that point, you know?
I know. They've never, and none of them, remember, we always look at Jackson and I feel like I've got a quiver full of darts and I'm throwing them at Jackson. That's not my intent at all. Everybody is going to be, you know, fighting with Lee as their commander for the first time with the 7 days coming up. Everybody, you know, so this is absolutely going to be a learning experience for all the, I almost said corps commanders, but they're not. All the big Confederate corps, I did it again. The big Confederate commanders, yeah. But also for Lee. Lee is, you know, he's not a battlefield commander. He hasn't done this, you know. So, how does General Mike Gorman handle this? I'm going to recognize all of that and probably spend a little bit more time with my guys. But I wasn't there. That's not a job I'm going to have anytime soon. So, that's just speculation.
How does General JoAnna McDonald handle that situation?
Ooh, well, there would be two different levels here. Strategically, I would go to Jeff Davis and say, you're all out of here. Get out of Richmond because you just stuck my military plan into too narrow of a focus, and I've got to maneuver. So I would step into the political realm because the political and military realm at that level, at Lee's level now, head of an army, and he was the commander of all the military forces. But so that would be the first thing. Then I would start the insurgency in the north and go after Lincoln personally, take him out, not personally, but and start catching cities on fire up north if I could, and getting the pro-Confederate papers working overtime for to excuse me,
And that's certainly getting into the political realm by kind of
establish the communication of putting doubts into the Union civilians. Now that's not Lee. Lee's a military guy, and he's at the tactics, and like Mike is just, we've said, he's a staff officer, and even in the Mexican War, he's out looking for roads to flank the enemy, which is exactly what he's doing in the entire Civil War. Lee does what a lot of generals do, and really something that I discuss when I talk to contemporary generals. It's like they fight the war that they were just in. Mm-hmm. So Lee's fighting the Mexican War. You hit the Army of Potomac hard. You have you have a series of victories. The Army of Potomac goes, this sucks. We're going to surrender. The North says, wow, this is bad. Surrender. But yeah, that's not realistic either. But again, we are our experiences, and Lee, that's what he experienced. So that's what he's going to go with. Now, when it comes to that first meeting where you've got 8 division commanders in one room. Yeah, the thing is, you don't have time. That's the other thing. Lee's got maybe 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so I actually, and I still think I go pretty easy, not easy, but I give Lee about a B+ for the 7 days campaign, because he just has no time, and the structure of the Army is so broad. But I think staying in the room is definite. The only problem is Lee gets uncomfortable when they start arguing, which is, again, goes back to, he's got that icky feeling, people are yelling. And Mike, I do get into the psychological aspect of Lee. I've studied that part of him. But I know it can be uncomfortable, but it's a definite skill generals have to hone. And as the commander, the director of this operation, if he could have stayed in that room and just listened to different ideas, but also gently direct, use his skills, gently direct the way that he's gonna want the situation to go. If this is the same council of war that I talk about in the dissertation, this is the one where the generals want to withdraw, right, Mike? Is this the one where, and he wants to stay?
No. You're thinking about the White House meeting when they're talking about we evacuate Richmond.
Oh, okay.
He slams his hand down and he says, Richmond shall not be given up.
Right.
Yeah. That's different. That decision's already been made. And he's got Davis in his pocket, more or less. And Davis did raise the objection that, you're stripping your lines in front of Richmond to do this. I don't like this at all. And Davis was placated, by saying, if this is going to be like Blitzkrieg, and we'll smash the Fifth Corps, and then McDonald will have to move. But that was one of those rare moments where he had Davis at this point signing off on something Davis didn't want to do. What we're talking about is the Davis House meeting on the.
Okay, all right. Well, either way, he needs to be staying in the room, and go ahead and just sit back and listen to the debate, but also stay in command of the situation.
And to me, that that is kind of going back to what you've both been saying, is like, if you want to let them kind of hash things out, because they also need to learn each other. That's part of this process too. But then stay in that room to make sure that good things will happen. And Mike, I really like the way you said that. Like, I'm going to put him in the room and hope good things happen. And listen to me, second guessing Robert E. Lee. The idea, let me come in the room. Like, okay, did you come up with something good? All right, and let's kind of hash this out a little bit. So now, JoAnna, you just threw something on the table that is huge, I think. And Mike, I got to get your take on this. A B+ for the 7 days. That is That's a high grade, I think.
I don't usually go for grades. But,
Grade on a curve.
I was as a first time commander, outstanding. No, end of the day, the 7 days is a mess.
Yeah.
It's a mess, colossal mess. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons that it kind of gets lumped in together. Right now, as we speak, although not for long, there's no books that I can go to. Here you go. Here's Gaines Mill, or here's Malvern Hill. There's one good book about Glendale. A lot of this has just sort of been just swept aside as although it's crazy that it has been, because it's how we get to Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia that can fight off the U.S. Army for 3 years. That's kind of important. We should look at it. But it is, I think, sort of an outgrowth of the lost cause-y tradition that, we can't look at it and see great Lee, and we can't look at it and see great Jackson. And, the only guy who's really got not a whole lot of flies on him is Longstreet, and lost causers don't like to talk about Longstreet. So, it's hard for people to sort of wrap their arms around. I think we're getting to that point where we can, objectively go, we don't necessarily need Lee to be, the Lee of Second Manassas or, Antietam or anything like that. We can just look at this DMS. So if we were assigning it, I can't get past the mess. This is barely passable. He's lucky. He's very lucky that McClellan didn't have better intelligence and understand what was actually going on. When you read McClellan's memoirs, which admittedly, he read the official records and understood that right before he died, he was not indeed outnumbered, but he went, his memoirs were published after the war, and he's got that in print where he seems to be from the grave saying, I was outnumbered, and he looks like a madman. But no, he knew by the end of his life and meant to revise them, but unfortunately he didn't. So for the rest of his life, though, he really did believe, and I think he had good reason to believe, that Lee had a colossal army, and that he was out, because it makes no sense stripping your lines in front of your capital city. That's insane. That's actually pretty much the definition of insane. Opening the door. Here you go, McClellan. If you figure this out, you can come right in. So I don't think McClellan ever really understood that that's exactly the game that Lee had played, and that's interesting to me. That, the heart of this thing is a gamble. The heart of this thing is a gamble, and it pays off. Although every second that ticked by, you've got to know Lee was just freaking out. Oh my gosh, is McDonald going to come south? Is McClellan going to advance on the south bank of the Chickahominy? We could be so screwed. If a few things go differently, we're not talking about Robert E. Lee. We're talking about the idiot of history. Oh, that Lee guy open the door to Richmond and let McClellan right on in. Yeah, that's a great general. So yeah, if we're doing grades, I'm not even close to B+. But I say he's lucky, and I, like any good gambler, I'd rather be lucky than good. Right.
Well, and you talk about McClellan kind of thinking about those overinflated numbers, and that's something that we laugh at him about today. But I don't. 7 days is like this big learning curve for everybody, and we forget that like the infrastructure doesn't exist to have accurate numbers. Like they're learning how to do that kind of stuff at that point, right? And so, it's from the point of hindsight, but from where he's at, like he has reason to think these numbers are solid because nobody really knows any different.
And something that often gets lost when we think about this, because we all like to pick on for McClellan. I am not a McClellan fanboy, believe me. Although they exist and they find me. There's nothing more fun than an afternoon with a McClellan lover. But no, I'm just fair to the guy. He knew that the Confederates had indeed passed a conscription act. He did not have that, right? So when he's saying to Lincoln, I need more men, Lincoln's writing back, dude, what? I can't wave a magic wand and troops up here. But in the South, that's exactly what they did with the conscription act. McClellan is not an idiot to imagine that every white Southerner is potentially in uniform and massing around Richmond. And so when he's getting the reports that he does, that is indeed the case, why would he doubt that? He's looking at the Confederacy going, I kind of wish we had that conscription act. I could really use that right about now. Oh, and now Lincoln and Stanton have pulled back McDowell. That was instrumental to my plan. the guy has been, hobbled in every way. So I am sympathetic up to a point, a very distinct point. But I am not a McClellan hater. We can't look at the 7 days without really putting McClellan and his ideas and his mentality front and center as well. But it goes back to that gamble. What happens when you're you're in a sports game and the other guys do a trick play? You're what? And I don't think he really understood that it was a trick play.
Yeah.
Because at Malvern Hill, he's really concerned that I saw this over here, but I really believe that there's like twice as much going around my flank right now. We better get the heck out of here. And that's not necessarily foolish if you really start with the premise that it's insane to strip your line in front of you.
Well, and here you raise a great point. I think that people think like, gosh, if Lee had been facing anybody else but McClellan during the 7 days, he probably would have not gotten away with so much that he was able to. But you can't really make that argument because he was facing McClellan during the 7 days, and all this baggage that McClellan has with him personally and intelligence wise and that sort of stuff. And so, it's the battle that you have, and you got to kind of figure out why people are acting the way that they are rather than sort of second guessing that stuff.
And he's a rookie too.
Yeah, the Yankees don't have the Union troop. The Union officers don't have the experience that they have in Gettysburg. So, I do give him a B+ for surviving. But the worst thing, and here's the irony of the whole situation, the worst thing for Lee and the Confederacy is that they win. McClellan withdraws and gives them that illusion of winning. And there's a
great point.
Famous quote, I think it goes all the way back to the Romans, probably the Greeks. Victory misleads, educate failure. Failure educates. Yeah, got that back. Victory misleads, failure educates. All along, the Union officers who are watching all this, and by the time they're at Gettysburg, they're learning. And Lee's learning the opposite of aggressive attacks work. They work. Look, they're leaving the field. Look, they're leaving the field. Yay. He never talks about it, but I would bet a whole $5 that at Gettysburg on the morning of July 3rd, he's thinking, all right, if we lose this final assault, Meade will leave the field. Why would he think that? Because McClellan left the field after Malvern Hill, which was an obvious Union victory. So there's this illusion going around the situation that kind of gets we don't always see because there's this illusion.
Right.
And Lee definitely doesn't see it.
So, Mike, is there a moment during the 7 days where Lee has the chance to kind of do a gut check and here's how the last couple of days have been working, I need to change my approach? Or are things just too fast and furious and too much of a hot mess?
I think the latter.
Okay.
No, I think it. I mean, look at his frustration after Glendale. When there's that famous line that D.H. Hill, reports on that General Lee, do you think the enemy's going to get away? And he says, yes, he's going to get away because I can't have my orders carried out. I mean, he is. Well, you're the general. If you're having problems with that, why don't you snag the guy and dude, you're screwing up. So is there any time during the campaign to really stop and go, whoa. I mean, think about it. Every day after Gaines Mill, they don't know where McClellan is going. They know he's going, but remember, the whole Army of the Potomac is now south of the Chickahominy, exactly where we don't want him to be. So that door open is now, is he going to walk through it? Mm-hmm. Right? Or is he going back down his supply line? Is he going to White House? Or is he going to the James River? I mean, just imagine the sweat, and this is a guy with heart problems. I mean, this must have been a really rough week. What is going to happen? I don't have time to be like, okay, while we're figuring all this out and we're all stressing, let's all huddle and what the heck, Jackson? That 6 hours? It never does not happen. In fact, I'd love to know if it ever did. Where you started with that quote where Jackson's being sent out and here's AP Hill to work with you. man, nobody screwed up worse than those two. And now you're sending them more or less both out on independent command. I got to tell you guys, I admittedly, I work for the government, but if I screw up bad, I guarantee you my boss is not going to be like, yeah, I understand. Off you go. Do something on your own. You're awesome. So I'd love to know if that ever happened, but it certainly doesn't happen during the 7 days. And I think it's very reactive on Lee's part. Once Gainesville is over, he's got to see where McClellan is going. He's got to respond to that. He's got to set up a new plan, which culminates at Glenn. 5 columns converging on one spot without cell phones. My God, how does this happen? Staff work, which is incredibly poor. I don't know if he ever knew that. What is an operational order that makes sense to people? I don't know. All these things are sort of indicative to me of that there's not that moment of reflection during the campaign. I don't know. I mean, JoAnna brought up Gettysburg. When Culp's Hill doesn't go off at the same time as Pickett's Charge, is Lee looking at it and going, "This is just like the freaking 7 days." That we can't get things to happen at once. I don't know. So much of this, if we could just sit down with Lee and get him drunk or cruise him or something like that, be like, okay, let's talk. I got some questions. I'd love to know. But, especially during the 7 days, you really just sort of see confusion over and over again. And the classic expression of this, read Lee's report on Gaines Mill. In August, he does not know that Bosun's Creek existed. He does not know where they actually fought at Gaines Mill. He still thinks they're at Powhite Creek. His whole plan was based on them being at Powhite Creek and having Jackson, make a federal sandwich. So when you read his report and you're reading this, you're like, what are you, huh? They're not at Powhite Creek, dude. They're a mile away. They're behind Bosun's Creek. He doesn't know. And he didn't have time to figure it out. So even when he's writing his report, months later, that confusion is still very much there. And it affects what I do to this day when I'm trying to understand this stuff. Is that level of confusion is so hard to wade through, with the hindsight of an historian. It can be prohibitive.
And to me, that's one of the kind of interesting things. I'm always kind of curious about what happens after the 7 days and before Cedar Mountain and Second Manassas and all that. Because he's got some time to catch his breath, and how does he use that? And I don't know if we understand that period of time especially well. JoAnna, let me ask you, did Lee have a propensity for self-reflection in those sorts of ways, or was he busy just kind of looking forward and being on the push?
No, and back then they didn't have that war college reflective system. He's an engineer, so he's a critical observer. He comes to a broken bridge, looks at how to fix it, and boom, gets to fixing. And that's how he approaches his campaigns. All of his campaigns, he's got one military goal, which I do give him an F for. That's the big thing. But his military goal in all his campaigns is to break or destroy or dismantle the Union Army, which is physically impossible in a civil war. He's never going to take the war, the violence, and it sounds a horrible thing. I'm actually not a violent person, but you have to take the violence in the Civil War to the civilians. So no, he's not a reflective thinker in that sense. At the same time, he does change things to from the 8 division commander system to 2 corps commanders. That's great. But then he goes too far, and instead of deliberating with Longstreet and Jackson, he goes full on intuitive thinking, Jedi mind. This is what I want to do. And that's Winfield Scott would do that too. Another civilian example. It's what older siblings do, or only children. This is when they get into a group. Let's do this, and everybody's like, "Yeah, okay." So he does that with Antietam, the Maryland campaign. He's already got troops going across the Potomac when he meets with Longstreet and Jackson. And Longstreet and Jackson are like, okay. So he's learning, but not reflecting on this. There's something else going on. Why am I winning 2 too easy? Am I winning? He's not asking that. Those are critical thinking questions. He's seeing progress where, again, there's an illusion of progress.
Mike, I saw that you were nodding ahead a second ago when she was talking about the reorganization of the Army in the wake of the 7 days and the creation of the 2-corps system and stuff. Is that an effective response to the 7 days, or is this Lee finally having the chance to kind of do maybe what he had wanted to do all along? Or?
Oh, that's
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I think that is a really, really important legacy of the 7 days. It's 3-corps. You got Longstreet first, Jackson second, APL third, right? 3-corps, and reorganizing the Army along those lines is not just a military thing. That requires Congress to create the ranks that these guys can occupy. I mean, so it's also the first time we see Lee getting a little bit, politically involved. I need this to happen, so go Congress, make that happen. But that also goes back to my question about when was that Lee's Army?
Yeah.
When was that not Johnson's Army anymore? Because he starts cleaning house hard, right? UG gone. Magruder, he sends him as far west as you can go, right? He sends him to Galveston, Texas, right? And that Juneteenth, right? I mean, that's the garrison that surrenders. So we're talking, get these guys out of my Army. Holmes, I mean, we can just get DHL, like you, but nobody else does. Out you go. It's remarkable. Actually, if you said, let me see the division commanders that really rocked it during the days, DHL was awesome. Yeah. DHL did a great job, right? But he just clashes with everybody. So you asked about that personality issue. Lee is taking hold of this, in the wake of the 7 days. And when it comes to creating those core, the core that we think of, the big three, to him, he's not just looking at it as who are my stars, who at this rank, because Lee would never go down. Okay, I got these guys at this level. Who are the three I think I can work with? And to him, the answer was clear. It was Longstreet, Jackson, and Hill. Now, you want to criticize that? You want to go, are those really the best guys? Well, hey, I wasn't there, and I'm not Lee. But I think the real legacy is in the wake of the 7 days. It's clear, whatever that question that I asked has been answered. It's Lee's Army. If Johnson comes back, he hasn't got Magruder, he hasn't got Holmes, he hasn't got UG. I mean, these guys are out. DHL, North Carolina, off you go. Everybody's sent away. Whiting, goodbye. Really, that is him cleaning house and making an army that he's going to work well with. So yeah, I think there's your big legacy.
And of course,
AP Hill and Jackson, they screwed me up hard. Are those my top choices? Man, I just have to believe there was that meeting. Okay, guys, close the door. We gotta. I'm thinking
they're aggressive. That's why he likes them.
Absolutely. Remember, I always say, if Lee woke up in the morning and there were 20 options and one of them was attack, every time,
right? Yep.
Every time. And if he loved aggressive commanders. If I say to attack, they do it. Right. That's his hallmark. And so, yeah. Although you can look at, ABL sure attacked. Maybe you should have waited for some people there at Gainesville. Jackson, maybe you could do with a little bit more time management skills. I don't know. I'm thinking it's like a boss would, but no matter whatever there, even if there wasn't a closed door meeting, those are the guys he thinks can be my guys. And they're the ones.
Don't forget Jeb. Jeb's got his, so it's Jeb, Longstreet.
That's an interesting one because Jeb Stuart started off rather ignominiously by disobeying Lee's direct order, and Lee didn't issue too many direct orders.
Jeb's his son. Yeah, Jeb's like his son.
Do not ride around McClellan's army. I know you want to. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
I know he said it. He really did. He was like, it's in print. He wrote it out.
I want to.
And then he's like, "We're gonna do it." And you just imagine when he completed his circuit around McClellan's army, and told your supply line's dangling in the air, and we just got it. Exactly what Lee didn't want him to find out. You can imagine riding up in Richmond with a beautiful hat, and just being like, yeah, thanks, buddy. Great. Now you got all the headlines. That's awesome. You're a real hero now. Yeah, you couldn't get rid of him. Remember, get rid of the heroes, right? Why is Magruder even there at the time of the 7 days? Lee was trying to get rid of him. There's a letter that is pretty clear that he wanted to get rid of Magruder before the 7 days, but when the 7 days was okay, I've got the team I've got, let's run with it. It would be more disruptive to replace him now. So I think there's a lot of it that's we'll wait for this to play out. But Magruder was a big hero, Stewart's a big hero, Jackson's a big hero, right? And I definitely think in the wake of the 7 days, it's like, he was probably like going to Davis being like, look, I got to get rid of some of these guys. And Davis was like, I'll let you have one of those. You could throw away one of those three, but you can't get rid of him. So it was Magruder. But we'll never know.
My supposition's always been, because you're right, you can't get rid of your heroes. And I think that's the only reason Jackson survives the 7 days from a leadership point of view, is because he had that success in the Valley. The one thing I probably give Lee a little credit for with that is because Jackson and Lee had corresponded throughout. Lee's like, well, I know what the dude's capable of. Didn't have such a great time here, but and so sort of gives him the benefit of the doubt, but we don't actually specifically know that.
Do we know if Lee understood that Jackson was seriously sick? I mean, Jackson had like malaria or something, didn't he?
Big bad case of exhaustion.
Battle fatigue. Yeah.
He hadn't slept for about a week and a half. Or KBL has, people go back and forth whether it was syphilis or gonorrhea or whatever, but he's got those health issues, shall we say? But Jackson during the 7 days was I mean, if you read Bud Robertson's biography, he went and looked like hour by hour, like where could he possibly, even if he didn't, where could he possibly have slept? And basically the guy was just driving himself. Yeah, I don't think that is an excuse. I'm tired of hearing this as if that is an explanation. An explanation is very different from an excuse.
Right.
If you can't command that day, I don't care if you're sick, exhausted. Cool. Here's what you do. Okay. Yeah. So I can't do it. You've got to take the reins today.
Right.
Do that. So time and again, when you look at this, I find a lot of people trying to find excuses, and that always makes me bristle. And I'm not saying you're doing it, by the way. I'm just saying, he was exhausted. He should not have continued, especially at White Oak Swamp. I mean, that is just, you lay that right at the feet of his exhaustion, but that doesn't get him off the hook. I mean, I understand why. I've been exhausted, but
that would be then an oversight of who the top commander, where Lee would have known, because he was involved in all the correspondence. He knows what Jackson was doing. So as the commander of the Army, Lee could have, but he's not going to, tactfully said, Jackson, you are exhausted. I want you rested up for the next campaign, and we're going to give it to, but that's what happened.
You'll after Spotsylvania leaps to mind. For your health, sir, you must retire. I'm fine. No, sir, for your health, you must retire. In other words, get out of my army.
Yeah. But and again, when we talked about those learning curves earlier, here's another one of those things, because today the modern military requires that commanders get a certain amount of sleep during a certain period of time. That wasn't the case. Jim Ogden brought this up to me out at Chickamauga once, talking about Rosecrans being physically exhausted, and so he starts making poor decisions at Chickamauga, just because he wasn't getting enough sleep. So, JoAnna, you were going to add something?
No. The modern day, they also use a lot of medication to keep themselves up, which is still, I don't think the decision making is still.
Yeah, I'm awake. Am I making smart choices? I don't know, but I'm awake.
Right. It's really difficult though. If you look at it from a sports perspective, from a civilian sports, you're going to take that. It's hard, but you're going to take a lead guy out, or gal, who's one of your top players, because they're exhausted. It would be extremely difficult for Lee to do with his first time out. And what does he do? He benches your guy who's been beating the snot out of the Yankees in Shenandoah Valley. So
who's probably putting on a face to be as absolutely subordinate as possible, because that's what Jackson was. Mike?
Right.
Really cool thing to talk about. I think it's something that when we look, whatever book you're reading, you kind of start imagining like whatever you're studying, this is a fresh army, and these guys are, you know, totally 100%, everything like that, and we remove that humanity from them. And when you were talking about this, it reminded me when we had the big, and I mean, it was freaking huge commemorations for the 150th of the 7 days. And me as a park ranger, every day I was out there talking about every one of the days of the 7 days. And I'm here to tell you, by the time we got to Malvern Hill, I was physically exhausted, and nobody was shooting at me. I didn't have to make command decisions. I showed up where I was supposed to be. I slept at home at night, but I was wiped out. Now, when you look at the 7 days, imagine doing that one huge thing, and then we're going to do it again tomorrow, and we're going to do it again, then we're going to do it again and again, right? And every day there's that, we got to move, 10 miles. We got to be at this road at this time. And oh my God, so again, not an excuse, big difference, but understanding where these guys are by the time they get to White Oak Swamp and Glendale and Malvern Hill, I think it's crucial. I think it is crucial. And that's not just the commanders, of course, that's the men themselves, right down in the ranks. This has been an awful week for virtually everybody. When Lee put everybody into the pool, everybody was in the pool. Everybody.
Chris, can I ask Mike a question, a follow-up?
Please. Yeah, please.
Okay, Mike, do we
Yeah.
have an attrition rate or a ballpark attrition rate? Because if they're going in after, battle back in the next day, I mean, like in the, we've got a pretty good idea, and we still argue about it, but there was a big attrition rate in the Maryland campaign.
Right. No, it's hard to know, and one of the reasons it is hard to know. I mean, you can go and you can look at the numbers that are published in the official records and all that kind of stuff. And please, but I often say that that's not really the whole effect, and numbers rarely are, because what that's not counting is those guys that are straggling for miles and heat exhaustion or just blatantly just could not. I can't. I've rolled my ankle. Whatever. I'll catch up. Those kind of things that we don't think about. This is literally 7 days, and everybody's like, well, what's the start of the 7 days? Well, it doesn't really work. But remember, they go from the outskirts of Richmond all the way down to Harrison's Landing. Right?
Yeah.
What does that do to you? I mean, and I'm not talking about not just shot. I mean, obviously, there's thousands and thousands. It's if you lump the 7 days together as one battle, this is astonishingly large in terms of the numbers involved and the casualty. I mean, it puts it right up there when we're talking about Gettysburg, Antietam, all the big battles. The problem is when you're looking at it as an historian, nobody was like, we just fought the Battle of Beaver Dam Creek. Okay, let's stop and we're gonna write our reports, right? Everybody's gonna because they're doing it again tomorrow. And so what you're left with, and it is really frustrating as an historian, because what you're left with is now by the time they're getting to write the reports, the guy who's writing the reports was a captain at Gaines's Mill because the colonel was killed, right? And he doesn't really even know what the overall big picture was, or the brigade commander, well, he was commanding a regiment during Malvern Hill, and now he's been promoted up. So there was infinite number of ways for things to get lost and not reported, and I really, really find that frustrating. It's just like if you study the Second World War and you want to know about D-Day. They didn't. D-Day was day one, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't get around to writing the reports until like day 32, right? So, and by that time, it's a big difference. So, yeah, you have that same effect when we're looking at the 7 days. But that shock and that cumulative effect, that psychic blow that is, so many casualties, just day after day after day. Nothing like this has ever happened in this war before, and that's not just at a command level. That's really down in the ranks, and understanding it that way, I think you go a long way to getting a handle on this.
That's always one of the challenges I have writing about the Overland campaign, and you see it down by the time they get to you in Cold Harbor, and it's like just unrelenting. Guys get killed, guys get wounded, they're gone. People are writing reports. People, it's really chaos to try to make sense of from a numerical point of view, particularly. So as we head into the home stretch, let me ask you, I mean, we've talked about this being a hot mess. Are there positives that Lee pulls out of the 7 days from a leadership point of view? And JoAnna, let me ask you maybe to kind of mull that over. I see she's giving me the any positives that Lee can take away from this?
I think the biggest positive we already touched on is changing the system, his command system of to the 2 corps and then his cavalry. Jeb Stewart, that's the biggest positive that comes out of this, in my opinion. The rest of it is, yeah, him winning the field of battle is a negative. Again, it's an irony, but it gives him that false illusion of that his aggressive tactics can win the war, and that's what you see through the whole thing. But out of the positives from 7 days, he goes into that 2 infantry corps and your cavalry, and that works great. He gets the personalities, and even then the personalities are still rare, but he can deal with that. Yeah, exactly. He can handle the Longstreet personality and the Jackson personality and Jeb.
Yeah, yeah. And Mike, you'd actually reminded us about the AP Hill component of that too. That's an issue because he clashes with Longstreet and then gets sent over to Jackson, and then the clashing there starts too. We sort of forget about AP Hill in all of that kind of
I
period.
know.
Just fill us in there a little bit there.
No. Well, it's rough because I don't like to unfairly criticize anybody, but it is fact of life. During the 7 days, he launches the thing at Beaver Dam Creek. Just, I mean, it was pretty clear, and even the poor orders that exist that we read, it's pretty clear that Branch was going to make contact with Jackson, and then he was going to communicate that to AP Hill, who would then attack. So it'd be like this big, wheel action, right? With Jackson, where my fingers are, like this, and that didn't happen. He just gets, seemingly tired of waiting, and just does it. Just does it. I like guys like that. They're like, I'm just going to do things, But in this case, I don't think he understood the bigger picture. I don't think he understood that this will fail colossally unless we've got everybody falling on the federal flank at the same time. And I would love it if if I had something from him where it would explain this. But the shame of it is, it goes right back to what we were talking about before. Freaking dies right at the end of the war. So we've got Longstreet's memoirs because he survives and lives to write, but Jackson dies and he doesn't get to write. A. Beale doesn't get to write because he freaking died. And we don't have any good, the only voice we have, at this command level is Longstreet. And that bugs me because anybody who's read Longstreet's memoirs knows that they're problematic. So I try not to give, him the voice all the time if I can help it. And I would love to give AP Hill the voice. But no doubt about it, everybody that encountered him, he was a prickly pear. Let's put it that way. Whether he was, and I imagine he was in rather constant misery from whatever his disease was, and that probably did affect his personality. Again, explanation, not an excuse. But getting along with people was not his forte. And he and Longstreet are in a clash. You mentioned that him and Jackson clashing is legendary. I mean, these guys go at it like two dogs in a pit. I mean, they just can't. You can't put them in proximity with each other, which is the ultimate irony. Is when Jackson shot, AP Hill's right there, and helps him, gets him the first aid process started. This is an interesting situation, but of course, we just don't have that kind of information that we would like. D.H. Hill remarks on it because he was watching all this stuff, and he wrote after the war, but he never achieved corps command under Lee. So again, it's that problem of sources, isn't it? Yeah. If we had anything other than Longstreet's accounts, maybe this would be a richer picture. But at the division level, we got lots of memoirs, but at the corps level, it's just the one. And of course, Lee never wrote anything. So, it would be wonderful if we could go back and okay, Lee, this is not going to be published till 100 years after you're dead. So go ahead and be honest. Tell us, what this was, what was like to work with AP Hill and Longstreet and Jackson. Those are the kind of, we're all dancing around this, and speculating a lot, and that's fine. It invites that speculation. But wouldn't it be great if we had that? if you read Grant's memoirs, he's on his way out, man. He's dying, and he lets. I mean, if Warren is still alive and he's criticizing him, he's a nice guy, but he was, Bruce said, wouldn't that be great if we had that from Lee? But we just don't. So by the time you mentioned Cold Harbor and the same problem of sources, whatever's going on with AP Hill, by the time 1864 rolls around, he's a walking corpse. It's bad news for him. So, like I say, a year and a half before that, I can only imagine that whatever was going on with him was definitely. But man, I've been in situations with powerful, very big personalities, and I can be one myself. I tend to butt heads with bullies, but man, putting those three guys in a room, it must have just stank with ego. You know what I mean? Like every meeting Eisenhower ever had, there's Patton, there's Montgomery, there's Spats, you're just like, oh my God, I walk in the room and there's just this ego stench, in the same way. So I don't want to be unfair to Hill. I can tell you that of all the Corps commanders that of the Army of Northern Virginia, we know the least about him. You can see giant books about Longstreet. You see giant books about Jackson. And there's one really good biography by Bud Robertson of AP Hill, and it's about like that.
Yeah.
And that's very sad to me. But we just.
So, my final question. Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, JoAnna.
Can I comment about AP Hill? If I might be running over, but the one thing I do come down on Lee, and it's not really an admonition towards Hill, AP Hill per se, but this whole ego where Hill, Ambrose, and Longstreet are going to duel after the 7 days, and everybody commends Lee for having the staff officers handle it. That's not the situation where a commander lets the junior officers take care of the situation. Even if Longstreet and Ambrose Hill wanted to just thumb wrestle, you have to establish command. It's egos you've got to sit on without this is the balance, without breaking them. It's immature, and Lee knew better. Lee's mom raised him where do not be doing this southern boy thing of running around with the girls and drinking and dueling each other. That's ridiculous. That's silly. That's your daddy. You know what happened to your daddy? He's dead. Anyways, so Lee knows that that's ridiculous. Also, with the Ambrose Hill and Jackson situation, it's the same thing. So he could have tactfully used his tactful skills and just said, Jim, taking him privately, Jim, Ambrose, if you ever do that again, I'm going to shoot you both in the kneecaps. He can use Lee's a very funny
tactful. Very tactful.
That's right. But he's not going to do that. He doesn't want to get involved in. He doesn't have time. I'm guessing he would think that, and then he doesn't want to be seen as the bad guy. If you're a commander, you're going to be a bad guy. But you don't.
And of course, Lee does the same. He does the same thing when Jackson has Hill court-martialing, and he could say, let it go, and he doesn't. He doesn't quite go that far. Right?
He needed to sit on Jackson.
All winter long.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, take Jackson aside, proudly say, Tom, I love you. Stop with these guys. You guys are you've created so much paperwork for me, and I need these guys. I mean, where's Hood in the Maryland campaign? Oh, yeah, right. Jackson, court, Hey, stop, Tom. Just stop. It's cool. I mean, unless they shoot at you, don't be court-martial them.
I would love to have just been there to hear Lee call him Tom or call him Jim. Good too. I gotta keep an eye on time here. Mike, any positive leadership lessons we can pull from Lee from the 7 days?
It's a tough one. I mean, and one that I'm often asked is, what is the legacy? I mean, we can certainly look at this as no matter what, and again, rather be lucky than good. He wins. McClellan is at Harrison's Landing, right? That's true. Now did he Tactically win? No, no. Strategically? Oh yeah. Oh, big time. And now he's in the driver's seat, right? Like everything is going to be responding to Lee at this point, right? He's going to go on the offensive. We know about that. Second Manassas, Cedar Mountain, all that kind of stuff is going to happen in short order. He's going to take the Army in hand, and like we already talked about, bring that core system into play, and it's really going to become Lee's Army. So again, if Johnson showed up, yeah, tough. This is not your Army anymore. This is a new thing that you don't get to command. But yeah, that's the real legacy of the 7 days from the Confederate side. But we can certainly look too, and we always forget about this, that ironically, that Lee's victory, if you will, during the 7 days, definitely empowers the Federals and the Lincoln administration to start moving the war in a very hard direction. And we're going to strike at slavery. McClellanism is out. We're gonna rid the Army of his stink and replace it with a new stink under John Pope. That's another story. So think about that. If Lee had failed during the 7 days and McClellan had been the victorious general, again, what ifs? But my gosh, the war ends with slavery intact. The hero of the war being George B. McClellan, a Democrat. I mean, whoa! Any moves towards emancipation, you can forget about it. So ironically, Lee's great victory during the 7 days, the one that put him in the driver's seat. The reason we know the words Robert E. Lee, such that young Mike Gorman thought his name was Robert E. Took me years to understand that it was Robert Edward Lee, Robert E. O. Right? That is what we get. But the reason that all occurred is ironic. If it had gone the other way, very different America. And I always put that right back in when we can.
That's a fantastic thought for us to wrap up on. Before I actually finish, though, Mike, I want to give you just an opportunity to talk about your involvement with CivilWarRichmond.com, which I think is a fantastic resource for folks who want to dive into these sorts of questions and topics and stuff.
Well, sure. You were talking to Mike Gorman doing his day job as park ranger and historian for the Western National Battlefield Park. But in my off time, I run a website called Civil War Richmond. And I've been doing that since the late 90s. So back when the internet had yellow pages, some of you might remember, I was in that. But it's basically an online file cabinet of everything I've been researching over the years, which is a lot. You might not be surprised to know that. It's related to Richmond itself. So if you go on there, especially the newspapers front, what's been really exciting now is how much been digitized newspapers-wise. The Freedmen's Bureau records are online now. Oh my God. And slowly but surely, the National Archives is digitizing more and more. And of course, this affects me and my job as well. So it's I always say, try to find the difference between, Park Ranger Mike and Mike. Good luck. I've stopped really trying. But if you go there, you can really dive in deep. And all I ask, and this is just as a park ranger, whatever you're going to say, have a source. Go to the source. They're there. They are not hard to find now. I made it easy for you. And let's at least talk about history, real history, not what you think, not what Granddaddy said. Let's get back and let the people who were there speak. And that's what it's about.
I think it's a wonderful project, a wonderful resource. I use it often. I wanted to just give you a little shout out for it because it's just
thank you.
Wonderful lifetime work. I guess we could call it CivilWarRichmond.com. So, JoAnna, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome. Good to be
Mike,
here.
thank you for being with us today.
Glad to be here. That was fun.
Had a great time chatting with both of you. Thank you so much. I'm Chris Mikowski for the Emerging Civil War Podcast. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.